Aram Manukian, also referred to as simply Aram, was an Armenian revolutionary, statesman, and a leading member of the nationalist Armenian Revolutionary Federation party. Born and educated in Russian Armenia, he was mostly active in Van, one of the largest cities in Turkish Armenia. He rose to prominence there as a community organizer. During the first months of World War I, he worked with local Ottoman officials to de-escalate rising tensions until mid-April 1915, when Turkish forces laid siege to the city. He led the successful Armenian civilian self-defense of Van. As a result, tens of thousands avoided being deported and massacred by the Turkish government while the Armenian genocide was underway. He briefly served as the head of the provisional government in Van. Following the Russian Revolution and the collapse of the Caucasian Front in 1917–18, Aram was popular dictator of the unconquered area around the city of Yerevan. In May 1918, he organized the defense against the advancing Turkish army, which were effectively stopped at the Battle of Sadarabad, preventing the possible destruction of the Armenian nation. Manukian played an important role in the establishment of the First Republic of Armenia and served as its first Minister of Internal Affairs. He died of typhus in January 1919, short of his 40th birthday. Aram Manukian was an advocate for self-reliance. He was noted for his ability to unite different sections of society for a common cause. He is widely considered by scholars to be the founder of the First Republic of Armenia. During the Soviet period, he, along with other prominent nationalists, was largely disregarded. Since 1990, attempts have been made to revive his memory in independent Armenia. Early life. Aram Manukian was born Sargos Hovhannisyan on 19 March 1879, either in Zava village in Zangasur or in Shusha, the largest city of Karabakh at the time. His father, Harutian, was a gunsmith. His mother, Sona, was a housewife. He was the youngest of 5 children. He received primary education at the Agalayat school in Shusha. Starting in 1895, he attended the city's diocesan school, where he joined the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, the main driving force of the Armenian national liberation movement. In the spring of 1901, Manukian was expelled from school for revolutionary activities and moved to Yerevan, where he continued his education at the local diocesan school. He graduated 2 years later, in May 1903. In 1903, Manukian went to Baku where he took part in strikes and later in the Armenian resistance against the confiscation of Armenian church properties by the Russian government. He was briefly in Elizabethpol to organize the Armenian resistance there. In mid-1903, he moved to Kars, where he actively took part in the formation of armed groups. In September 1903, within a group of 150 men, Aram Manukian tried to cross the Russian-Turkish border to transfer weaponry to the Fedaya in Sassoon. However, he returned to Kars due to illness. Activities in Van. Manukian settled in the city of Van in February 1905. Because he spent most of his political career, except the last few years, in Van, Aram became associated with the city and came to be known as Aram of Van. He soon became the head of the local party branch and sought to strengthen its influence in Van. Manukian was convinced that if Armenians were going to revolt against Ottoman rule, it needed to be a well-organized and widespread revolt, not a local one, such as the failed uprising in Sassoon in 1904. He engaged in community organizing and transfer of weaponry to Van from Russia and Iran. In 1906 alone, more weapons were transferred to Van than in the previous 15 years. Prior to the Young Turk Revolution, the party branch in Van had around 1,000 members. He also sought to minimize the Ottoman government interference in internal Armenian matters. The ARF effectively established unofficial courts for Armenians who were mistreated by the Turkish judiciary. In 1907, during the ARF Congress in Vienna, where he was the delegate from Van, Aram expressed skepticism about the declared goals of the Turkish émigré political movements in Europe that the ARF was cooperating with, particularly the Young Turks. He said that they are, for the most part, palace revolutionaries who in one sense or another have dynastic interests. Manukian claimed that if they begin with them, we are going to encounter a great many problems. A year later, the Young Turks ousted Sultan Abdulhamid II from power and restored the constitution. Turkish Armenians reacted positively to the overthrow of the Sultan. After the revolution, Manukian taught at a school in Urdu. He returned to Van in late 1912. Meanwhile, the Adana massacre of 1909 largely ended the Armenian hopes of reforms by the Young Turks. However, Manukian continued to work with local Ottoman officials and other Armenian parties, especially the Armenian Party, to improve the condition of the Armenians. He became the leader of the ARF in the Van region along with Ishkan and Ramian. He took an active role in the Armenian community by teaching at schools, communicating with the press and promoting Armenian youth circles. In December 1912, Aram Manukian became a suspect in the murder of the mayor of Van, Bedros Karparmagian, an Armenian loyalist to the Ottoman government. He was arrested along with several other notable ARF members as encouragers for the murder, according to Turkish sources. He was later released. World War I. During World War I, the Young Turk government of the Ottoman Empire planned and carried out the Armenian genocide, the systematic extermination of the Armenians living in their ancestral lands. In the spring of 1915, Van became the only location where Armenians organized a major resistance. Aram Manukian played a key role in this resistance, widely seen as self-defense. In late 1914, during the first months of the war, tensions in the Van Vilayet had been kept low by the cooperation of the Dashnik leaders Manukian, Ishkan, Ottoman Parliament Deputy Ramian, and local Young Turk officials, and Van Governor Tarzan Bey, who was considered a moderate. In early August, a general mobilization took place, during which some problems arose that were solved by the cooperation of these parties. An important event occurred in September, when Sevdet, the radical brother-in-law of Minister of War Enver Pasha, was appointed governor. According to Raymond Kevorkian, Sevdet's appointment was probably calculated to make it easier to implement a policy of provocation. Quote, several more or less serious incidents occurred in the Vilayet of Van between December 1914 and March 1915. Each time, the Armenian leaders had to step in to pour oil on troubled waters. Clashes between Armenians and Turks in the Van Vilayet became more frequent in March and April 1915. In late March and early April, Sevdet, Aram Manukian, Ramian and other major figures met to discuss the tensions. In mid-April, an incident took place in Shatik. On the night of the 16th of April, Ishkan, who was assigned a mediator's role, was killed by a group of Circassians while staying in a Kurdish friend's house in a nearby village. According to Kevorkian, there is every reason to believe that none other than Sevdet, the superior of these Circas, had ordered these killings. He had probably come to the conclusion that he could accomplish nothing in a city with an Armenian majority unless he first got rid of the three Dashnik leaders. His behavior of the following day tends to confirm this suspicion. The next morning, Savdet invited both Aram and Vramian to his Khanaq. Aram did not go upon Vramian's advice. Vramian was subsequently murdered in a location near Bitlis. The news shocked and dismayed the population. The American missionaries in Van Dry, Clarence Usher and Miss Grace Knapp, who were eyewitnesses to these events, provide us details that leave little doubt as to the valley's intentions. On the 18th of April, Savdet demanded all Armenians turn in their arms. Kevorkian suggests, knew that they were doomed if they obeyed, yet, if they failed to, they would provide the valley with the pretext he needed to attack the city's Christian quarters and the rural areas. In other words, the Armenian leader's strategy of temporization had become obsolete. The murder of Ishkan on the night of the 16th of April and the arrest of Varshaj Vramian Van still did not know that he had been murdered, probably convinced the last Armenian leader left alive, Aram Manukian, to reject the authorities' injunctions and prepare the city for an attack that was now certain to come. With Ishkan and Vramian assassinated, Manukian remained only major Armenian leader in Van. Turkish forces attacked Tigerstan, the old city of Van, with a mixed Armenian-Turkish population, on the 20th of April. Aram had already made preparations to ward off an attack and was able to prevent the Turkish troops from entering the quarter. Quote, in the following days, around 15,000 Armenian villages poured into the old city quarter. With the Russian Armenian forces reaching Van, the Muslim population and Ottoman forces began to evacuate Van on the 14th of May, with the last troops leaving on the 16th of May after burning down the barracks. On the 18th of May, Armenian volunteers under Vardan entered Van, followed by Russian troops under Major General Nikolaev. During this time, Nikolaev selected Manukian as the provisional governor of Van, allowing him to establish a provincial government. Manukian's administration lasted until the end of July. Yerevan. Turkish offensive between October 21, 1917 and April 14, 1918. Manukian edited the newspaper Ashketank and Yerevan. Following the February Revolution of 1917, the Armenian-populated areas formerly controlled by the Russian Empire had no effective political administration. In Yerevan, Bishop Koren sponsored the establishment of a provincial council in December 1917. Aram was sent by the Tiflis-based Armenian National Council to head the civil administration of the city. Miller writes that the choice was well calculated, for the hero of Van was a veteran organizer, fully aware of the strengths and shortcomings of his people. Aram arrived in Yerevan in early January 1918 and organized a committee which served as an unofficial administration. His committee established law and order in the city by expelling several Armenian bandit groups, imposing special taxes and confiscating material abandoned by the Russian troops. In early 1918, Manukian and DRO established what historians describe as a popular dictatorship in the areas around Yerevan. Aram was popularly proclaimed dictator of Yerevan in March thereafter, consolidating all power in his hands. An effective military dictatorship was established in the last surviving pocket of unconquered Armenian-populated territories. Turkish forces, in violation of the Armistice of Erzincan, moved towards eastern Armenia in the spring of 1918. Aram's popular dictatorship is credited with successfully stopping the Turkish forces at the Battle of Sadarabad in late May 1918. A number of documents show that Aram headed the Armenian defense against the Turks. Minister of Internal Affairs on June 30. A five-member cabinet was formed by Hovhannes Kachars-Nanai in Tiflis, with Manukian being appointed Minister of Internal Affairs. On July 19, Aram, General Nazarbakian and Dr. greeted the Kachars-Nanai-led cabinet arriving in Yerevan. According to Hovhannes, even after the cabinet had begun to function in the capital, many who believed that Aram Manukian, the Minister of Interior, operated as a virtual dictator. Hovhannes described the ministry as strong, pervasive, effective, or contentious under Aram. The controversial and extra-legal activities of his department provoked the ire of parties both to the right and to the left of Naxution. Aram's impatience with the fetters of parliamentary government was evident, and under the conditions then existing in Armenia, it was not difficult to find ample justification for strong centralized control or even a dictatorial regime. Ronald Grigasuni wrote that Aram was supported by those who insisted that the times required dictatorial rule, while the champions of democracy in the legislature frequently criticized the high-handed methods of the Interior Ministry under Aram Manukian's direction. Between November 15 and December 13, 1918, Manukian acted as Minister of Labour after Minister Kachatur Karchikian was killed. Death and funeral. With a large number of Armenian refugees settled in Yerevan, a typhus epidemic spread in the city during the winter of 1918–1919. Around 2,000 orphans and refugees perished. Aram Manukian contracted the typhus in December 1918 when he was visiting the camps of refugees from the genocide. He died on the 26th of January 1919. He was living in extreme poverty and refused to take medicine and gave it away to the poor. He wore old shoes and clothes. His death came as a shock, and his funeral became a national day of mourning with thousands of Yerevan residents attending it. His biographer Arshaliza Stvatzatrian has left the following description of his burial. The interment of Aram was an expression of great popular mourning. Thousands of people had come to give the final respect to the man to whom they had entrusted their fortune in the hardest days. I know what Aram was for Yerevan, but anyway, when we took out the coffin from his home, what I saw outside woke me up from the impact of the great loss and amazed me. Wherever you looked, it was a human sea. In the street, on the roofs, windows, balconies, everything was occupied. The whole city, old and young, had come out to the street. For the Church of Peter and Paul until the cemetery, the funeral carriage was empty. They were carrying the coffin on the shoulders, and the carriers were mainly the Armenians from Van, who were particularly fond of Aram. That day, the capital of Armenia was in mourning. According to Richard Hovhannes, the death of Aram, the invincible leader, deepened the gloom in Yerevan. Manukian was initially buried at the Mler cemetery. In the 1930s, during the large-scale reconstructions in Yerevan, his remains were moved to Kozan Cemetery, which was soon turned into a park, and was eventually reburied at the Yerevan City Cemetery. In 1979, a group of Armenian patriots found Aram's tombstone, and in August 1982 put a car made by Garnik Amirjanian on it. Personal life. Manukian married Katrin Zalian in Yerevan in 1917. They met at an orphanage, where she worked as a doctor. Their only daughter, Seda, was born in 1918. Katrin was one of 3 females elected to the Armenian parliament in 1919. Upon Aram's death and Armenia's takeover by Bolsheviks, she found herself an unemployed single mother. She settled in Krasnodar, Russia, but returned to Soviet Armenia in 1927 to fill the shortage of doctors. She died in 1965. Their daughter, Seda, lived in Yerevan until 1976 when she moved to Moscow. She was married to the son of the prominent Fedor Yerevan. She died in 2005. Legacy and public image. Founder of the First Republic, Aram Manukian is now almost universally considered the founder of the First Republic, including by historians Richard G. Hovannesian, Gerard Libradian, Armen Nasrian, Amatuni Varabian, and Levon Sherinian. Historian Harutian Tershian described him as one of the few realist figures in Armenia's entire history, and opined that a distance in time is necessary to see his greatness and correctly evaluate him. During his funeral, Minister of Culture and Education Nicola Balian stated, "Ask yourselves if you have worked for the Armenian people as much as Aram. Ask yourselves if you have been as selfless as Aram, and have you given your life to the Armenian people as much as Aram." Simon Vratishin, the First Republic's last Prime Minister, said of Aram that he never betrayed the people, remained within the people and made superhuman efforts in easing the pain. Modern leading ARF politician Vahan Hovannesian stated in 2008 that Aram Manukian is the best example in Armenian history of a statesman that stood by the people. Soviet and independence eras. As a result of the 70-year-long anti-Dashnik propaganda in Soviet Armenia, Aram Manukian and other key ARF members who played major roles in modern Armenian history were largely discredited and forgotten. Efforts were made by politicians to revive Aram's memory after Armenia achieved independence from the Soviet Union. To symbolize the revival of Armenian statehood, the initial declaration of the independence of Armenia from the Soviet Union on the 23rd of August 1990 was read by Aram Manukian, a member of the parliament who was chosen only because he bore the same name as the founder of the First Republic. However, Manukian is still not widely known to the Armenian public. Manukian's house in Yerevan. When Manukian moved to Yerevan in 1917, one of Yerevan's wealthiest citizens, Fadi Kalantarian, donated to him a two-story house in the center of the town, built in 1910 by the architect Boris Merabian. In 1919, the street where his house was located was renamed Aram Street. After Soviet rule was established, it was renamed after the Bolshevik Shuranspandarian. In 1991, after independence, it was again renamed Aram Street. The house, located at 9 Aram Street, is now a roofless shell and ignored by the authorities. The property is owned by Glendale Hills Real Estate Development Company since 2005. According to reporter Tatul Hakobian, the house is owned by the Swiss-Armenian businessman Vartan Sermakes, who is the CEO of the watchmaking company Frank Muller and founder of Armswiss Bank. Tributes. Aram Manukian's bust was unveiled before the Armenian police headquarters in 2009 due to the fact that he was Armenia's first interior minister, which includes the police department. The ARF-affiliated Wikipedia criticized the Armenian government, saying, "Find another nation which pays tribute to the founder of the statehood by a bust, yet alone before the police headquarters." Just because Aram Manukian was the Minister of Internal Affairs of the First Republic, historian Tigran Petroscience suggested that the Yerevan municipality erect a statue of Aram in the city. In Kapan, a neighborhood is named after him. In 2007, Aram's bust was unveiled in the city. A medal of the Armenian police named after Manukian is awarded to a police employee for significant contribution to the police system operations, development, strengthening law and order, combating crime, maintenance of public order and security protection, staff education. In 1989, a volunteer regiment Aram Manukian was founded founded in the city of Ararat, which took part in the Nagorno-Karabakh War. The Canadian branch of the Armenian Youth Federation named its Cambridge, Ontario chapter after Aram Manukian. In popular culture, in 2007 the public television of Armenia produced a 50-minute-long documentary about Manukian. Bibliography. Specifically about Aram Manukian. Beirut, Lebanon, Hamazkayan Printing, 1969. Yerevan, Mikhail Varantian Printing, 1991. Asrian, Arman, Karapetian, MHER. Yerevan, Lusak, Asrian, Armin, Patma Banazir Arakan Handes, 42-54. ISSN 01350536. Varabian, Amatuni, ed. Yerevan, National Archives of Armenia. Yerevan, Institute of History of the Armenian Academy of Sciences. 2010. General Hovannesian, Richard. The Republic of Armenia. The First Year, 1918-1919. University of California Press. ISBN 9780520018051. Walker, Christopher J. Armenia, The Survival of a Nation. New York, St. Martin's Press. ISBN 9780312042301. Adalian, Reuben Paul. Historical Dictionary of Armenia. Lanham, Maryland, Scarecrow Press. ISBN 9780810874503. Kevorkian, Raymond H. The Armenian Genocide, A Complete History. London, I.B. Taurus. ISBN 9781848,855,618. Librarian, Gerard J. Armenia at the Crossroads, Democracy and Nationhood in the Post-Soviet Era. Essays, interviews, and speeches by the leaders of the National Democratic Movement in Armenia. Watertown, Massachusetts. Blue Crane Nooks, p. 19. ISBN 9780962871511. Paeslian, Simon. The History of Armenia. New York, Palgrave Macmillan. ISBN 978-1-4039-74679. Miller, Donald E. Turyan Miller, Lorna. Armenia, Portraits of Survival and Hope. Berkeley, California, University of California Press. ISBN 97805202925. Melikian, Vahan, Patma Banazir Arakan Handes, 72-93. ISSN 01350536. Gershudyan, Lendrush, 1918. Patma Banazir Arakan Handes, 27-38. ISSN 01350536. Sahakian R.O., 1915. Patma Banazir Arakan Handes, 19-30. ISSN 01350536. H. Rath Union A. 1915. El Rabuhas Arikakan Gatutunari, 46-58. ISSN 03208117.